So in the last video, we have gone through two examples of changes in demand and supply. So the first example we go through is a adverse shift in demand curve, which is right here, caused by higher interest rate. And the second example we have gone through is a adverse shift in the supply curve, resulting in a higher price and lower quantity. So in today's video, we are going to finish up with the other two possibilities. So let's look at a positive shift in demand. Or you can say shift to the right. I think one important thing to note is that positive does not necessarily mean good. It just means that the demand, the quantity, the ultimate quantity in the market have increased. So that's what they mean by positive. Okay, so going back to our demand factors, let's have a look. So maybe we will choose a different example this time. Let's do a higher disposable income. Higher disposable income. I choose this factor deliberately because ultimately in the exam, you need to link the demand factor with what is actually going on in the economy. So in this instance, higher disposable income could be a result of a tax cut. And we know that in government budget, there is frequently tax cut. The reason is, we will cover this in Unit 4, area of study 1, is because when we have inflation in the economy, the wage would progressively going up over time. So there is a problem called bracket creep. So although your real income is unchanged, but because you have this higher nominal income, you enter a higher tax bracket and pay more tax. So effectively, the rise in wage due to inflation could actually decrease your real income because you are now in a higher tax bracket. So that's why we need to have a tax cut every few years and to counteract these effects. We will talk more about this later. So now let's just focus on this example. If we have a tax cut, then we would consequently have a higher disposable income. And this, as we have already mentioned before, increases the willingness and ability for you to purchase goods and services. And this is a positive demand factor, which shifts the demand curve to the right. By the way, in the exam, when you are explaining this, you need to write them down explicitly. And you can't just say that tax cuts shift demand to the right. You need to repeat my reasoning, which I have said before, and then write it down in the exam answer sheet. In this way, you can get full mark in your response. So this is the supply curve, this is the demand curve. So it shifts to the right. So now we have a more quantity and then higher price, as you can see. But in the exam, you need to explain this step by step. So just using the exact same procedure as we have before. Step 1, when we look at the original price, this is the quantity supplied, which in one period before is also equal to the quantity demanded. But because we have this tax cut and the demand curve have shifted to the right, we have a higher demand at original price. So now the quantity demanded is higher than the quantity supplied. And this creates a shortage. And when there's shortage, firm will notice this shortage. So use this opportunity to raise price. Because as we know that companies, they are there to make a profit. If they see that something is in high demand, they will raise price. A really live example is that if you recall, during 2022, the used car price have increased by 40-50% because there is a huge demand of second-hand cars. And so the company, second-hand car companies look at this shortage and then they raise price to increase their profit. So that's what I mean by use opportunity to raise price, because they want to gain greater profit. Step 3. This is also important. It is the relative price that is increased. So when talk about higher price, usually we don't actually mean absolute price change. We look at relative price change, because it is relative price that determines our decision-making process. So that's why relative price is important. And it is also an important economic concept for you to remember. And the examiner are constantly looking for these key terms, because if you simply say that price have increased, thus changing people's decision, this is not entirely accurate, because we know that only relative price can influence choice and behaviors. So because relative price have increased, firms reallocate resources. Firms reallocate resources to the production of these goods or services. This step is also important because relative price affects firms' decision as well. And then also simultaneously, the demand from consumers would decrease. We call this a contraction in demand, due to two effects. The first one is income effect. The second one is substitution effect. So when things get more expensive, you have less income to purchase these goods and services, which means demand would increase. Also, when the price of a particular goods increase, you may substitute to other similar products. So this is the substitution effect. If you can mention those two effects in the exam, I think the examiner will be very happy, because this shows you have a very in-depth understanding of economics. So what would be the final result? Well, if firms allocate more resources to the production of these goods or services, the supply would increase. So as we can see here, we have an expansion in supply, corresponding with an increase in price. Also, we can also say that the demand have contracted due to this higher price, which can further broken down into the income and substitution effect. The end result is we reach an equilibrium. So the step 5 is actually just to state what is the ultimate effect. State the ultimate effect, which is a higher quantity demanded or quantity supplied, as well as a higher price. So this is how you explain the dynamic of adjustment in detail, which is required in the exam. Okay, let's look at the final example of a shift in supply to the right. So let's go back to our supply factor. Remember that the supply factor is actually really easy to remember. As long as you can link it to the cost of production, everything should be fine. So maybe we can say a technological progress. Maybe an invention of ChatGPT. This is also important because in the examiner likes to use recent phenomena. So maybe they will actually ask ChatGPT or something in the exam, and you need to keep up to date with the news. Some students will be surprised when they see some recent event that they are not aware of, so they are unable to establish this link. Imagine if you don't know what ChatGPT is, then it's very difficult for you to answer those kind of questions. Okay, so invention of ChatGPT, you need always to establish a link between technological progress and cost of production. This decrease unit cost of production, or you can say average cost of production. And then what is the consequence of this is that firms are more willing and able to supply. This is also extremely important. So those are very important links that you must state in your extended response questions. Otherwise, you will be take mark off. So be very careful of this. And then supply curve shift to the right. If you go directly from here to here, no, this will not work. You need to explain step by step what is your logic behind this conclusion. Okay, so supply curve shift to the right. Some people also say shift down. It's all acceptable, doesn't matter. And then we still use the same idea as before. So maybe you can have a try of this yourself. How you explain those kind of things. Remember we look at the original price. This is demand, this is supply. Step 1, you have a surplus. Step 2, when firms see a surplus, the inventory level starts to go up. They are very worried because the product is not selling. So they are incentivized to lower the price to attract sales. Step 3, remember which price you are talking about. You are talking about relative price. So when firms see a surplus, they will try to lower the price, the relative price of their product, to attract sales. And because the relative price have decreased, then step 4 becomes when price have decreased, then we see a contraction of supply. Because remember, we have free entry and free exit. So when profit is not as high, so when they are unable to earn a normal amount of profit, some firms would leave the market. And this would cause contraction in supply. And reallocation of resources away from the production of this particular goods and services. And this is really important. This is what ensures that under a perfectly competitive market, the market is efficient. Because whenever we see any change in demand or supply, we have this immediate reallocation of resources into different areas. So this ensures that resources are devoted in areas which can maximize the well-being of the community. So that's why we like a competitive market. And all those adjustments may not be true if we have market power. So keep this in mind. We are working with perfectly competitive markets only in this instance. Also, because of this lower relative price, we see an expansion in supply, in demand, sorry. And this is because we have mentioned many times now, income effect and substitution effect. Mention these two terms in your exam. It will give you a higher mark. So eventually step 5, always reiterate the ultimate effect. We have a higher quantity than before and a lower price than before. And I guess you can see some interesting things just from this observation. If we have a favorable or a good supply shock, such as increase in productivity, we can actually have more product traded at a lower price. So this is very good for the economy because we don't suffer from inflation, but simultaneously an increase in output in quantity supplied can increase the GDP growth rate. So this is a very desirable circumstance. So we have mentioned the idea of relative price many times when we are talking about these adjustment processes. And in a free and competitive market, the relative price is just a price of one good in terms of another. And this is determined by the force of demand and supply, which is what the whole point of doing the demand and supply analysis. And because of the changes in demand and changes in supply, changes in relative price, this can influence firms' profitability. And because we have free entry and exit, this ultimately determines where the resources are allocated. So this is key. This is also important because this is one of our assumptions, which may not be true in the real world. And the reason why we have this reallocation is because of another assumption, where firms want to maximize their profit. And I think it is a reasonable assumption to make in the economy. And now we can go and talk about some forms of efficiencies and how market is actually good for efficiency. So now let's firstly talk about one of the most important type of efficiency or form of efficiency, which is called allocative efficiency. So allocative efficiency refers, remember the production possibility frontier. This is just an illustration, it's not entirely accurate, but hopefully you can get the point. The allocative efficiency must lie on this production possibility frontier. And what efficiency does the whole frontier represent? The whole frontier is technical efficiency. The definition of technical efficiency is very simple. Max output for a given input. So as we recall that the production positivity frontier is the best we can do as an economy. So the most efficient allocation. Anything inside are not efficient. Anything outside are unfeasible. So this is what we mean by technical efficiency. Is the best we can do to produce. Or sometimes this is called productive efficiency. I think it is more commonly called productive efficiency. But you can use different terms, of course. So the allocative efficiency is only the one particular point on the efficient frontier that maximizes society's collective satisfaction. So it is a point on production positivity that maximizes society's well-being. So if the economy is operating allocatively efficiently, then we can conclude the economy must be technically efficient as well, because it is a point on the production frontier. But the converse is not true. If an economy is technically or productively efficient, this does not necessarily mean it is allocatively efficient, because allocative efficiency is only one combination of goods, of allocation of resources that maximizes society's collective well-being. So another consequence is that, so if we are allocatively efficient, any deviation from this point makes us worse off. So this is kind of subjective, I would say, because different society values different things, and different economies may have completely different resource allocation, but are still both allocatively efficient. And technical efficiency, productive efficiency are more objective, because it is simply the maximum output you can obtain at lowest cost. So productivity is maximized. So this is productive efficiency. The third type, dynamic efficiency. Dynamic efficiency basically is how well you can reallocate your resources. So suppose because I have mentioned allocative efficiency, what is good is actually subjective, so it may change over time. One example is during COVID, people suddenly start to demand more masks. So now we have a different priority. And how quickly the economy can reallocate its scarce resources, land, labor, capital, into the production of masks, it's telling you how dynamically efficient the economy is. If we can suddenly produce a lot of masks, then the economy is dynamically efficient. This is closely linked with allocative efficiency, because when we have a changing priority or changing needs, a society that are dynamically efficient can quickly reach the new production points or the new resource allocation points where allocative efficiency can be maximized. So they are related. And the fourth one is intertemporal efficiency. So this is basically a balance current with future needs. and protects the environment essentially. For example, the refrigerant used in air conditioners. Back in the day, they have this old style refrigerant, which they are actually, in terms of the performance, is better than the refrigerant we have available today. But they can deplete the ozone layer. So the government have forced company to produce refrigerants that does not cause harm to the environment, even though they are less powerful than the old style aircon. So in this case, we are kind of sacrificing some productive efficiency and to gain intertemporal efficiency. So as you can see, that sometimes they are not really compatible with each other, especially productive efficiency and intertemporal efficiency. But dynamic efficiency is compatible with allocative efficiency. And generally speaking, markets are efficient at allocating goods and services to achieve allocative efficiency in the economy. So now maybe let's look at naturally another related topics. It's called market failures. So market failures refers to the circumstance where free market, so a perfectly competitive market. So we have already said a lot of good things about perfectly competitive market, how it allocate resources efficiently. But sometimes it can fail. To allocate resources in a way that maximizes society's satisfaction. Hence, require government regulations. So there are many types of instances where market failure can occur. The first one is called public goods. So public good is basically goods that are non-excludable, non-various. So what do I mean by non-excludable? So you can't prevent people who don't pay to use the service. Non-reverse. So if others use this goods or service, does not reduce your own enjoyment. So many examples such as defense, street lamps, etc. So for defense, if a country have lots of military and lots of military equipment, then everyone in this country is protected, no matter whether you are paying tax or not. So not excludable. No reverse, or if one person enjoys the safety, does not reduces your own enjoyment of protection from defense force. So that's why it is a public good. And in a perfectly competitive market, no one will pay because everyone is rational. if I can enjoy this protection without paying, then I'm not going to pay. So this is causes a free rider problem. Since nobody is paying and firms are designed to maximize their profit, they are not going to provide defense to citizens. And so everybody will be under constant military threats. So this is very problematic because under those threats, it is very difficult for the economy to operate efficiently. And because of this under allocation of resources, without government intervention, this service will not be provided, and the society is not allocatively efficient. So this is not good. A second type of market failure is called externalities. So this is a very big one, which is divided into 4 subcategories. So we now look at externality in consumption. And also externality in production. So in consumption, we have a positive externality. Which is the consumption of these particular goods and services conveys a benefit in consumption and production to third party not involved in the transaction. And this is problematic because from an individual perspective, you are optimizing. But from a societal perspective, because your consumption or your production conveys a benefit, from society's perspective, the resources is under-allocated to the provision of these particular goods and services. So there is actually 2 types of perspective going on when trying to understand externalities. So we have private benefit. So this is what you as a person faces when making a decision. We also have a societal benefit. So this is what society, when taken as a whole, would benefit from your consumption, from your production. In the case of positive externality, you only consider your private benefit. But because your action conveys a benefit to the society as well, the societal benefit is greater than your private benefit. And because of this, since you only consider yourself, you are ignoring the benefit that societies can bring to the economy. And therefore, we have a under-allocation of resources. From society's perspective, this is really important because from a private perspective, there is no under-allocation of resources since you are maximizing your own benefit. I think This is not covered in VCE economics, so it is useful to help you to understand what is going on. So we still have a demand and supply curve. And we look at positive externality in consumption. So in consumption, there's actually two curves going on. We have private cost and we have this is private benefit, societal benefit. And you can see clearly as an individual, you are maximizing your own benefits you consume here. But what about from society's perspective? Because you are conveying this benefit. So this is the size of externality. From society's perspective, you should consume it here. So this gap is what I mean by under allocation of resources. And this is the problem with perfectly competitive market, because nobody cares about society, they only care about themselves. Similarly, for positive externality in production, you have a private cost. You also have a social cost. As you can see, the social cost is lower than the private cost because you are passing on some of the benefit to society when you are producing something. So overall, the cost is actually low. And in this instance, you are also under-allocating your resources. So hopefully this graphical representation makes the understanding of this topic easier. So now let's look at negative externality. Also, by the way, maybe I should give you some examples of positive externality in consumption. One good example is education. So a more educated workforce is good for the country overall because the crime rate would decrease. People pay more tax. But this is not considered when you are choosing your own education. So this will cause under-allocation of educated workforce. For production, I guess it's more difficult. So more difficult to find the example, but beekeepers, and they also make the fruits grow more, so can increase the yield on a particular farmland. But this is not considered by beekeeper when they are making their own decisions. So from a society's perspective, we should have more bees, but because everyone just think about themselves, we have less bees than optimal. So negative externality. Also, the definition is that the consumption or production of a goods or services that conveys a cost to third party, not considered by private economic agents when making a decision. And in this case, we have over-allocation of resources. So it is basically the inverse of what we have just discussed before. So let's look at a very famous example. Cigarettes. So the private benefit is actually higher than the social benefit. So this is the socially optimal quantity. This is the quantity on the perfectly competitive market, which poses a problem in the society, because we are over allocating resources towards cigarettes. And for supply, we also could have negative externality in supply, in production, such as pollution from factory. We know that when factories they have waste, it's easy to just dump it to the environment than to spend money and deal with those waste. So this would mean that the private cost is lower than the social cost when dumping rubbish into the river. Because from a social perspective, you need to consider the health consequence, the health of plants, of animals, of this and that. But from a factory owner's perspective, they only look at how much money I can save by dumping this rubbish into the environment. So as you can also see, we have this over allocation of resources towards a high polluting industry. So this is what I mean by externalities. And I think in the exam it's often easier to answer questions with negative externality because there's a pattern. So everything you just copy down this definition and then apply it to a particular example you have, which makes everything very easy. But I guess for the public good, you can't explain this with a diagram, so it's a little bit harder. Another market failure that is very, very easy to explain, and I think I used this one in my own exam, final exam as well, is asymmetric information. So as the name suggests, one party have more information than another party. I know in the textbook they have different fancy examples. I recommend you stick to this example. Second-hand cars. This is a very, very good example to use. So when you're buying second-hand cars, the seller has more information than you. They know how the car is getting driven. They know how often they change their oil. They know a lot about the car, whether it has been involved in any accident, whether it's parked in the garage or in the street. You don't know any of the information. So you are very concerned, naturally, about the history and condition of the car. And because you are concerned, maybe some of you will just quit the market and buy new cars instead. because used car is so dangerous, maybe I just buy a new car. I can buy a cheaper new cars, but I'm not going to buy any used cars. There are too many lemons out there. So in the long term, this is really bad for the economy. Because those used cars may end up in junkyard when they are perfectly usable, because nobody is wanting to buy second-hand cars. And we also know that many new cars are produced unnecessarily. If you have actually purchased a used car, then the new car may never be manufactured. And we know that the production of new cars requires lots and lots of materials. Each car is like 1.5 to 2 tons in weight. So how much material it have used during the production? How much waste it have generated in this production? So this will cause over-allocation of resources to new car, which result in resource depletion, and under-allocation of resources to old cars, which result in waste. And you can see that this is a huge waste of resources. Very bad for the environment. So social satisfaction not maximized. Allocative efficiency not achieved. Very undesirable outcome. The last one, common access resources. Very similar to public good, with the exception it is rigorous in consumption. So one example is fisheries. So this means if your enjoyment reduces other people's enjoyment. So this is what I mean by rigorous in consumption. Fishery is a good example because it does not have a price. So if you go fishing in the ocean, you don't pay any price for it. And you may pay for the boat and for the petrol, but then you are not paying for the fish. So because there's no market price, because the fish is essentially free, you want to get as much as possible. Or maybe say overuse the resources. To maximize private benefit, again, we see this distinction between private and social benefit. So sometimes, although you are acting rationally privately, from a societal perspective, you are making everybody worse off. So this undermines intertemporal efficiency. and consequently reduce allocative efficiency. Because from a society's perspective, we are not doing the best we can. And this is market failure. Of course, we can address those market failures by using interventions. So we can use indirect tax. This is commonly used in the tobacco industry. So remember that I have actually drawn a diagram for negative externality in consumption. And you can see that the price of cigarette seems to be lower in the socially optimal outcome. But this is not accurate. What I'm trying to illustrate here is the quantity only. So I'm trying to emphasize that the optimal quantity is less than the private consumed quantity. Do not look at the price here. This illustration is only telling you that what the quantity should be and what is the actual quantity without any intervention. So it is not a contradiction, it's just the way I have shown you. So that's why in the indirect tax, we actually want to increase the price on tobacco in order to discourage consumption, in order to discourage the decrease the quantity of tobacco traded in the market. So as long as we can achieve this objective, whatever means you use is okay. The reason why we don't use the consumer side is that it is difficult. Because how do you reduce the private benefit of smoking? Maybe you make it more difficult for people to smoke outside, but that's very vague. But certainly we can increase the cost of production very easily. And we know that the cost of production is a supply factor. So although we had this divergence in the demand curve, we are actually going to shift the supply curve to address negative externality in consumption. So let's have a look. So this is the private cost, private benefit, social benefit. We know this is the optimal quantity, and we want to shift the supply curve. But very importantly, we do not, so this social benefit curve is used as a reference to you only. Because when people are making decisions, they looking at their own private benefit only. And the social benefit, the purpose is to find the optimal quantity. But how far or how much we need to levy the tax is based on the shape of private benefit. And we will talk about the significance of the slope of private benefit later in externalities. So this is what we want to end up. And this is the actual price. As we can see, the price is significantly higher. So we levy a tax to shift the supply curve to the left. And this point has the optimal quantity and it has a higher price, which justifies our intuition. The tax on tobacco increases the price of tobacco. decreases the quantity consumed. So now, if we look at the curve, even though the smokers are still considering their private benefit, they are actually consuming at a socially optimal level because of the tax involved. So they are forced to smoke less, and less to the point that it is actually efficient for the society. And efficient doesn't mean that no one smokes. So if the tax revenue raised is enough to counteract the negative social cost of smoking, then it is still efficient. So how do we explain this? Very, very similar to what we have discussed before. Step 1. Because of the tax increase cost of production. Reduce willingness, ability to supply. Shift supply curve to the left. And then, step 2, producer pass on the cost to smokers, because we know that tobacco is addictive, so producers cannot easily pass on this higher cost to consumers. And this is the old story we have, relative price increased. We have a contraction in demand and actually a small expansion in supply. But this is okay as long as we are at socially optimal level. The goal is not to eliminate cigarette production or consumption, but rather to reach a socially optimal outcome. And now, step 4, we look at what is going on with demand and supply. So now we have this decrease in demand and increase in supply. So converge, very important word to use, to a new equilibrium where price is higher and quantity back to socially optimal level. And now society's collective well-being can be maximized and allocative efficiency can be achieved. Another way we can counteract this externality is using government regulation. So government regulation is designed to change the way that resources is allocated, not by price mechanism, but rather by rules and different policies. So the Australian government, aside from imposing a very high tobacco excise, also have lots of limitations on where you can smoke. So you can't smoke in public outdoor space. And this encourages to make it difficult to smoke. And this will change the taste and preference of consumer. Hence, shift demand to the left. And then you can use the same story we have repeated many times now to answer the question. When demand shifts to the right, to the left, there is a surplus at the original price, and because of the surplus, firms say build up in their inventories, so they are encouraged to lower the price. Once they lower the price, we have this expansion in demand due to income effect, due to substitution effect, and then we have this decrease in supply because firms reallocate their resources away from the production of cigarette to production of other socially optimal goods and services, and so eventually demand and supply converges to the new equilibrium where the quantity demanded is lower and the price is also lower. So that's how you answer all those type of questions. They are all essentially the same. So practice is really important. Once you know how to answer this type of questions, every exam question would seem really easy. So practice writing those extended response questions. All you need to do is to establish the link between government regulation and demand curve. Once the demand curve have shifted, then everything, all the explanations are essentially the same. We can then have government advertising. So smoke cause sticky blood. Things like this you see on television, you see on YouTube. And this, you need to make the link between how does this shift the demand curve. This would actually change the taste and preference of consumers. Then it should shift the demand curve, and then it's exactly the same story as before. So as you can see, it's kind of very repetitive in this instance, and I don't think this subject is particularly challenging because everything, if you know how to answer this type of question, everything would seem really easy. So again, practice is key. So that's some of the ways we can address the market failures. We can also have subsidies. So this is for positive externality. So how can subsidy address this problem? If we have a positive externality, so in production, we have a private cost. We also have a social cost. And then we have a demand. Okay, so as you can see, the social cost is actually lower than private cost. So we can just give firms a subsidy to decrease their cost of production. To decrease cost of production. And what is this? This shift supply to the right. And you should be really happy when you are at this stage, because you know exactly what is going on when your supply shifts to the right. You just use the story we have told many times before. Step 1, you have a surplus. Step 2, you lower the price, and then this and then that. Ultimately, you have a higher quantity and lower price. And this is desirable because we know that on the private market, we have a under allocation of resources. But now, since the quantity have increased, we now corrected this under allocation of resources. One example is research and development. So this can actually convey a benefit to society. So thing called NVIDIA researched their new graphic card, which can use for artificial intelligence and improve our lives. And then because of this third party benefit from societal perspective, without the subsidy, there's actually under allocation of resources towards the innovative sectors. So by giving them a subsidy, we can reduce this externality, so we are at socially optimal outcome. And ultimately, I think the last step we need to do is to say, since more resources are allocated towards innovation, and allocative efficiency is achieved, social satisfaction is maximized. So that's it. That's how you answer those kind of questions. You name one externality. You explain what is going on, whether you have under or over allocation of resources, and then you propose a solution. And then you link this solution with a shift in demand, shift in supply, and then you just use the same old story we have talked about many times ago, how this caused surplus or shortage, and then this changed the relative price, and then you have expansion, contraction in demand, in supply, and then you converge to a new equilibrium with higher quantity, lower price. Exactly the same process. So yeah, it is really not so difficult once you actually sit down and then think through those concepts, and as well as doing practice questions. Okay, we have talked about how good the government is at addressing market failures. Of course, government can also fail. Government failures. So this is a very interesting topic. So actually, the government intervention fails to improve society's satisfaction, harms allocative efficiency. Hopefully you can see that there's like a connection between satisfaction and allocative efficiency. I guess they are really the same. So if society's satisfaction is not maximized, you are not allocatively efficient. Okay, so what are some of the examples of government failures? My favorite example, minimum wage. It seems to be a very good thing. How can minimum wage be government failure? How can minimum wage decrease allocative efficiency? So this is why the study of economics becomes useful, because it enables you to see things from a different perspective. So we have price, we have quantity. And remember to label what market you are talking about. So in this case, as I have mentioned in the introductory video, labor market, very special type of market, where you and I, who are usually the demand of demand of products, in this case, we are the supply of labor. Firms become demand for labor. So this is really interesting. So back in the day, I remember reading on the news that some restaurants are paying illegal immigrants about $10 per hour. And because they are doing this illegally, it is actually the equilibrium price. So $10 is the equilibrium labor market price for unskilled laborers. But we know the minimum wage in Australia is, I can't remember how much, it's like $24 approximately. So if everybody follows the rule, follows the law, then you get a problem. This is the quantity demanded. This is the quantity supplied. Because the wage is so high, firms are trying to hire as little people as possible. Because the minimum wage is so high, everyone, 18 years old, students, and different types of people, they are now start to look for jobs. So we have this mismatch, quantity supplied higher than quantity demand. And this is okay in a goods market. But now, the reason why labor market is special is that we are talking about people. So when quantity supplied is higher than quantity demanded, another way to say this is you have unemployment. Unemployment is bad for families, bad for people, so on and so forth. And we know that theoretically, with a $10 minimum wage, there should be no unemployment. Quantity supplied is exactly equal to quantity demand. So for those who are employed, this is great news. You get more money. For those who are unemployed, bad. This is very bad. Because in free market, this will not happen. There should be no unemployment, theoretically. So this is how government fails to increase allocative efficiency by generating unemployment through this minimum wage legislation. So hence, for some people, they lose access to many goods and services because they are unemployed. So it's all the same, basically. Satisfaction not maximized, allocative efficiency not achieved. Although it is very repetitive, you need to mention this sentence because this is how minimum wage caused market failure. Is that we are not achieving allocative efficiency. So this is an important argument, although it seems to be very repetitive. Okay, so now we move on to the last study design topic of microeconomics. And this is called the elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. The price elasticity of demand, PED. Remember this definition exactly because you will need this in your exam. Responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price. In simple terms, how does a change in price influence the quantity demanded? So this is linked closely with the shape of demand curve. Could look something like this, could look something like this. We want to classify them. That's why we study elasticity. So in this case, we have a very inelastic demand. Why? Because even with a huge change in price, we have a very small change in quantity. In this case, we have elastic demand. Why? Because for a small change in price, we have a huge change in quantity. So we have a very flat demand curve. And this is very significant because firms want to operate in this kind of market. They want to operate in inelastic market because they have market power. They can raise price to whatever level they want without really changing the quantity demanded. So in this way, they can dramatically increase their profit. So usually, a monopoly have a demand curve that looks like this because you have no choice. If you are going to drink water, you have to pay for water. And whether the price is $2 per liter or $20 per liter, you are still going to drink water. Otherwise, you will not survive. So this leads us nicely into factors that affect price elasticity of demand. The first one is degree of necessity. For very important goods and services like bread, or milk, we have inelastic demand. Because you need them to survive. Because it is a necessity. For luxury items, may not be the case. An increase in perhaps increase 2% in price may cause a 10% fall in demand because they are not necessity. Another way you can say this is quantity drops proportionally more than increase in price. So in this case, it's best not to increase price, as it causes drop in profit. So that's why PED is important, because it allows us to investigate the structure of particular markets. Another factor, substitutes. So if there are a lot of substitutes, we have elastic demand. More substitutes, more elastic. For example, you don't have many substitutes for water. Even though you may think about, oh, I can drink Coca-Cola, but it's still based on water. So that's why the demand for water is very inelastic. Perhaps the demand for mobile phones are more elastic, since there are so many brands to choose from. And if Samsung increases their price by too much, people may switch to other makers. So they need to be very careful when choosing their price. And if it's significantly higher than competitors, Samsung would lose a lot of market shares. The third one is proportion of income. So maybe we have a kilo of rice and a sports car. Use this example to illustrate. The price of 1 kilogram of rice rise from $3 to $6. Sports car from 300,000 to 600,000. For this one, I don't really mind. It's okay. Maybe small decrease in demand. For this one, however, it's becoming too expensive. Maybe switch to another car. Because $3 to $6, although the price have doubled, it's not a big deal. But then from 300K to 600K, it is a very big deal, since this occupies a very large proportion of your income. Whereas for the rice, it's very small proportion. So in this case, the demand is a little bit inelastic. For this one, it's elastic, precisely due to this reason. The last one, time. Usually, if we think about coal-generated electricity, well, in the short term, it is very inelastic. You can't install solar panels within 1 day, but in the long term, it is very elastic. After 10 years, 20 years, every household may have solar panel on their roof, may have battery to store this electricity. Eventually, we may have zero demand for coal-generated electricity. So if we extend the time frame, then the demand elasticity for coal-generated electricity would become much more elastic than if we are talking about 1 or 2 days, where I think it should be perfectly inelastic, because you really cannot do much thing within a matter of days. So the price elasticity of coal-generated electricity should increase over time. So now we talk about the price elasticity of supply. So again, the definition: responsiveness of quantity supplied to a change in price. So a high price elasticity of supply means that for a very small change in price, you have a huge change in quantity. For inelastic supply, no matter how much the price changes, the quantity change is relatively small. So same idea as the price elasticity of demand. Now we look at some of the factors. So the first factor is production period. So for fruit, you only can grow fruit maybe 3 to 6 months. Even if price doubles, we would expect to see no real change in supply, because it really takes a long time to grow a fruit. Whereas for something like maybe shoes, only takes days to make. So if price increases, supply also increases. Very quickly. So this is elastic, this is inelastic. Okay. Second factor, spare capacity. So if there are lots of idle resources, you can ramp up production quickly. If price increases, you have an elastic supply. And conversely, if there's no idle resources, you can't really do much to increase your supply. So you have inelastic supply. So the last one is durability. So for bananas, the shelf life is maybe a few weeks maximum. So you cannot store this product to perhaps prepare for increasing demand, maybe during Christmas, because they can only last a few weeks. But maybe for canned banana, you can perfectly. Maybe shelf life is a few years. So you can store it to meet unexpected demand. And consequently, the supply is elastic. Why is this the case? So if price increases, you can quickly release the supply to the market. So that's it. That's all the content for Unit 3 area of study 1 of VCE economics. In the next subsequent videos, we are going to move on to a different topic.